by strong long-term economic growth. Energy use in non-OECD countries increases by 90%. In OECD countries, it's 17%. Now, let me hasten to point out that the base in non-OECD countries is much less. So the developing countries are increasing just about as much in terms of absolute amounts as the non-OECD countries, just for the record. Both of these projections are based on the assumption that national policies and regulations stay the same. So there is a chance to change this if something happens in Paris. U.S. leadership will be a key part of any international agreement toward cutting greenhouse gas emissions. If we talk about all working together, but we're not ready to put anything in the pot, then guess what? We're the big dog, and if the big dog's leadership example is do nothing, then the rest of the dogs, never mind. I'm not saying that the nations of the world are dogs. Did I say that? Now, China and the US and India are the three largest emitters. So it isn't just developed countries. We have a couple of developing countries, arguably, in the top three. And China has overtaken the US as number one, US number two, India number three. U.S. per capita emissions, however, are more than 3 times China's. So you're an American citizen, you use 3 times as much energy as China, and they are 12 times India's. So we're twice as much of an energy hog as the average Indian person. Therefore, U.S. policy related to climate change will be an important signal for other UN member states. And this previous information also points out that it isn't just developed countries that are in the game. We have a few emitters from developing countries who are in the top 10. 3 elements of U.S. policy are EPA's June 2014 Clean Power Plan, the Climate Action Plan that was put out in June 2013, and the Quadrennial Energy Review, Energy Transmission, Storage, and Distribution, which is expected later this fall. So you can argue that the United States is paying a lot of attention to this topic and doing a lot of reports. And I encourage you to pay attention to all of these balls, because they're all, I think, important. The U.S. EPA's Clean Power Plan would cut carbon emissions from the power sector by 30% nationwide below 2005 levels. And they would cut particle pollution, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur dioxide by more than 25% as a co-benefit, avoid up to 6,600 premature deaths and 150,000 asthma attacks in children, and up to 490,000 missed work or school days, providing up to $93 billion in climate and public health benefits. My job used to be to do these kind of stats, and there they are. And shrink electricity bills roughly 8% by increasing energy efficiency and reducing demand in the electricity system. EPA has received over 300,000 comments on this proposal and has taken 1,300 comments at 4 public meetings in the last couple of months. The plan is expected to be issued in June 2015. The states are then given flexibility in meeting requirements through plans which will be due in June 2016. So this will play out over the next 2 years. In preparation for proposing the Clean Power Plan, EPA met with the states of the U.S. and found that 47 have utilities that run demand-side energy efficiency programs, 38 have renewable portfolio standards, meaning you have to have a certain amount of renewables in your portfolio when you're providing electricity, and 10 have market-based greenhouse gas emissions programs. So EPA did its homework, found out that there's a lot going on, and they've taken a lot of comments. They're not just shooting from the hip, and they're not just crazy. You consider the source. I did work there for 34 years. But never mind, I don't think they are. I think they're doing a really sincere effort. The Climate Action Plan, which came out in 2013, says we're going to cut carbon pollution, and of course this clean energy plan is a big piece of that. Prepare the U.S. for impacts of climate change. And the fellow from Peru talked about impacts of climate change on the poorest in Peru and how that's a really important agenda issue for them. Well, in the U.S., we're making it one of our top 3 also. and lead international efforts to combat global climate change and prepare for its impacts. Okay, and their announcement this week that we're deciding to go around the Senate, where 67 votes proves to be hard, even for a treaty such as the rights of the child, which we haven't taken action on. Maybe this is a smart way to go, and maybe naming and shaming is going to be important. This plan emphasizes efficiency gains, which lower energy demand, increase mileage standards, which will lower energy consumption in transportation, and substitutes natural gas for coal to lower emissions from electricity generation. And I say that last one is important to me because it acknowledges that natural gas, which has about half the carbon impact as coal, may be an intermediate step. And I understand that in these halls that all fossil fuels are bad guys, but in the short term, we need to pay attention to what is going to be marginal improvements, in my humble opinion. You've probably noticed by now how humble my opinions are. And I want to talk about the quadrennial energy review, which will provide a multi-year roadmap that outlines federal energy policy objectives, legislative proposals to Congress, executive actions, and research development programs and funding and financing and incentive programs. The first installment, which will come out later this fall, will focus on transmission, storage, and distribution infrastructure that links energy supplies to intermediate and end users. And that's real important because where the wind is not where the people are that use electricity. And where the solar is isn't necessarily where it is. So if we don't invest in this infrastructure to transmit the electricity from where it can be generated to where it's needed, we're whistling Dixie. Oh, imagine that. I'm not from the south. I'm from the wing. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed budget legislation which forbids EPA to proceed with the Clean Power Plan. A lawsuit by 12 states, they're the coal states by the way, seeks to stop the Clean Power Plan. And both the House budget legislation and the state's lawsuit also call for an end to EPA's rulemaking on carbon as a pollutant, which was issued in 2013, on which I believe the U.S. EPA has received 3 million comments. Figure out how you're going to answer those comments, every one of them. Okay, the Clean Power Plan is a key element of U.S. participation in the global effort to lower greenhouse gas emissions, without which ominous projections will prevail. In other words, all these projections are made based on the current state of affairs. The Clean Power Plan is a new element of the game. If the U.S. pursues the Clean Power Plan, it will cut emissions by 30%. If it doesn't, they'll stay about the same, no cut, and probably go up. By the way I look at it, because you can't get 25% more electricity out of nothing. Something's got to happen, just my opinion. However, as a veteran of the wars of garbage, which is where I was for 34 years, I want to say that there are other ways for the global community to go. We didn't have regulations to stop the 30,000 open dumps in America, which are now down to maybe 500. We use persuasion, and you use persuasion by enrolling people. For example, the cities of America currently have lots and lots of opportunity to save energy with various projects through efficiency. If the U.S. government had a program of highlighting those that are doing the right thing, had a couple of experts who were looking into better ways to do the right thing, and had lists of how much is coming out of cities that are doing the wrong thing, mind you, that's most all the cities, so then we would have a game where people would be aware of their opportunities for making change in the right direction. And what you do to put a little charge on that is you have grants to the various organizations where cities work, the National Association of Counties, the National City Managers, Public Works Association, and the national legislative bodies. There are state legislatures also have their national organizations, and you give them a grant to have workshops at every one of their annual meetings about what you can do to save energy in your town or your state. kind of thing might also apply to the international level. When I was back at EPA, I met the person from the U.S. government who was our representative to the United Nations Environmental Program. Was he an engineer who was helping them come up with better ideas? No. Was he a scientist helping them invent better things? No. He was a lawyer, and his job was to make sure that nothing happened that was going to increase the scope of work of UNEP, which was to be following the language of about 5,000 treaties. Let's see now, let's polish up the language, but let's not do anything. Well, I think we've gone beyond that at UNEP, and I think UNEP would be a great place to have a little bit of afterburner on our efforts to